So you get your thermal, you get your inversion layer, the thermal punches into it, and you might have a easterly wind blowing here, and say that's going to 7,000 feet. Thermal will punch maybe to 7.5. And we've seen on our area forecast chart there the winds from the east at 10 knots, 7,000, northwesterly 20 knots. So really now the thermal becomes like a ridge, like a mountain. So the breeze up top hits the thermal, goes over the top, and basically they call it wave, it's really ridge lift. It's thermal wave is what they call it. If you're really lucky, there'll be a Q marking it, which makes it much easier, but we do get this in the blue. It's much harder to find in the blue. I think in the blue I can probably find it maybe 10 or 20% of the time. With cloud, almost all the time. So this will go very high. The highest I've been in thermal wave, I think the cloud base was around the 8,000. I think Welshie was around that day years and years ago. And I seem to remember the tops being maybe 14. And I pulled out at 18 because I didn't have oxygen. So, I know it's naughty, this is a long time ago when I was only about 18. So really you can see that tremendous altitude you can get out of thermal waves. So that was still going up at about 200 feet a minute when I pulled out.
How do you get into it?
Tell you, don't worry. So it's almost always there if there's a wind shear of some sort. It doesn't just have to be, so you can have an easterly blowing, it can be just that it shifts to the north. So a common day for these things to be happening is obviously a trough day, when we're getting good thermals up to 10,000 feet. And the upper winds in Australia at our latitude generally are from the west. So you're almost always going to have some sort of a wind shear when you're getting clouds up or thermals up to 10,000 feet. How do you get into it? Over east, I reckon they get maybe 3/4 of the days will have thermal wave. A lot more than we get here. So we'll make it easy with a cloud. And you can actually tell the thermals, the waves happening. The clouds look funny. They're leaning back. So you've got your wind this direction. The clouds lean with the wind because the wind here is light, or it's even an easterly, and up here it's just getting stronger and stronger westerly. And you'll actually see, it'll actually sort of be rolling in on itself up the top, and almost even looks like a little anvil at the back, but it'll definitely be sinking at the back. So anyway, what happens is you get your climb, so your good core is going to be here somewhere, good core is going to be into wind normally, and on the sunny side. Thermal up, you're under the Q, so build up speed, pull up. As you get there, it'll go dead smooth. It's like wave flying, it becomes smoother than smooth. It almost feels like you've stopped flying. You're probably only getting half a knot up now. So sometimes you've got to fly a little bit out from the Q as well, so you might have to go a kilometre out into wind. Still only be getting 1 knot, half a knot, very, very weak. You might have to start to do some S-turns. S-turns in front of the cloud. If you do the big turns, if you do thermaling, you'll actually drift back into the cloud. So it is like a ridge. So you do those little S-turns, as you climb maybe 500 feet, it'll start to pick up, and maybe half up the cloud, you're starting to get 500-600 feet a minute. And you can maintain yourself over the cloud or just in front of it. Sometimes you've got to move just a little bit forward. As you climb up, you've got to move forward a bit sometimes. Big thing I've noticed of getting into wave though, you can't force it. So if you've got a really weak climb here, 1 to 2 knots, you're just trying to get the cloud base. It seems that when you fly out here, you're just not breaking past that inversion layer. So it's quite frustrating. You can be near the cloud, you just need a little bit more height, but you haven't got a strong climb to get you into it. You really need a good strong climb. When you get that, it's easy. Strong climb, fly into wind, bang, you're in it. And you'll see guys in it already. And if you're in this weak climb, if you'll pop out here, nothing, back here, drive you nuts. So just keep looking for the good strong climb. Don't try and milk the weak climb. It might even be better to go to another queue.
I try and crank the speed up a bit underneath it.
In fact, if you get this good climb and you just fly out, you actually don't even need it. So I think what's happened is it's pushed you up, so the inversion's down here, say. So I think the strong climb has got you, so you're just going easily into the above the inversion. I think the weak climb, the inversion's probably sitting almost at the same height. So the inversion might be here. So I think you're just getting there, you're just flying under it. You're not actually getting into this new wind layer. And we're very sport now with GPS. We can actually see the wind changing, and much easier to find than it used to be. I think that's, any questions about getting into a wave? It's great when you get there. It's almost of no use to you in competitions, because I've always found that the first leg's always this way. So you're pushing into a 40 knot headwind eventually, and the guys down here are only either got a tailwind or only a 5 or a 10 knot headwind. But if you were going that way, it'd be fantastic. It takes so long to get into it, even on a task, it's not worth doing. But it is good fun, it looks good. And of course, pre-start though, it's brilliant. Especially now we've got GPS. I've had competitions where I've been sitting at Gawler, I think at 12,000 feet, and everyone's at 4,000 feet, but we had cameras. I couldn't take a photo of the start point. I had to pull air brakes and come down and start at 4,000.
There is a good.
It was very frustrating. It's funny because I was with Andy Pybus and we had someone leeching on us. And it's funny seeing a leecher with full air brakes as well.
Is there a chance of actually real waves on the downwind side go?
I don't think so. I think it's really ridge lift. I think it's really ridge lift. Have you had much experience with any wave? They call it wave, but I don't see that it is. Like, that's it for it, Greg. Thunderstorms, I mean, we don't get a lot here, maybe when the trough's going through. Over east, get a lot of thunderstorms because they get the trough just sit inland and they might sit there and task amongst them all week. But with us, we don't get it much. They're very useful for flying and you get some fantastic lift just before they become the storm. But you've got to be obviously very careful. Generally, with a thunderstorm, you're getting nice high cloud base. So say 10 or 12,000 feet. So if you're going to go thunderstorm flying, the idea is to stay high, because if it starts to turn, it turns quick. As soon as you start to see some rain start to come out of it, it might be 10 minutes, might be 5 minutes, and you've got lightning, very heavy rain, wet wings, and if you're only halfway up the cloud, halfway up the thermal at 5,000 feet, you're only going to glide 20k straight in the paddock. Probably the storm's going to come over you, damage your glider, or certainly put you out of action anyway. So, got your big, still safe to fly under that. As soon as you start to see the rain in the middle, you can still usable. You may be on, say, a westerly wind. Say that's like the trough lines coming in. Lots of good cues all this way. And I mean, the main reason you'll be using the Thunderstorm is because they've set a task and you have to go there. Otherwise you'd be heading away from it, I would have thought. Anyway, it's whilst the rain's just starting to come down, on this side of the cloud, still going to get lift. You could on this side, but I'd say in the WA case, really, because the trough's probably this way coming through, that you're going to get washed out anyway. So you're looking at the downwind side. You know, the anvil's starting to form. Still get there, get in, get your photo, whatever, or get your GPS position and get out. Well, you can run down them though. You can run down them for a while. If your seeds start to turn bad, if you've got the altitude, you can still get out. Now, if you get caught out by a thunderstorm and you see the heavy rain starting to get wet, you're starting to decide, well, where do I go? Well, normally they're going to be following the flow east, so you really don't want to head east. You end up in a paddock with a storm coming over you very shortly. I'd say it doesn't matter how well you tie down your glider, if it's the wrong storm, it's going to get damaged. So really you want to either get upwind of it. This side's going to be the sea breeze, so it's going to be dead. You're not going to really, probably not have a chance of soaring, but at least you'll be able to land. There'll be a strong wind on the ground, but the glider will be safe. The other thing you can do, obviously, is fly south or north of the storm, so it just passes you. As the storm goes past, it's going to kill your thermals for an hour. So that's why you need to be near the cloud base, so you can glide a long way, get the clouds, get to the new clouds, get to the new thermals that are still going. Thunderstorms, we spoke about how do you pick them. The aerological diagram we spoke about. If you get that wet trace going so here's that's the temp trace, a height temp. So normally the thermal would go about 3 degrees per 1,000 feet sat, and if your saturation level's there, that's going to then flow up, and you can see that it's just going to go ballistic. That's when you know the storms are going to happen. They'll be on the forecast anyway. They're normally pretty conservative with forecasting them. So if they think they're going to be there, they tell you they're going to be there. They'll put a low probability, 10% or 30%. Any questions about storms and how to avoid them?
I had 2 paddocks on fire below me from lightning.
Yeah, look, you don't want to land near them. You can set your glider afire. Yeah. And the other problem too is you've got to make sure you don't get up near cloud base, because 1,500, 2,000 feet a minute, even with full air brake, you might not be able to stay out of the cloud. As soon as you go in the cloud, very good chance of icing.
Yeah, might be worth talking a little bit, very briefly, and you don't have to worry if you don't follow this, but a little bit about heat transfer. Any mechanical engineers here? It's a maybe mechanical engineer.
Anybody like to be a mechanical engineer?
Well, for heat transfer, you've got heat transfer convection, conduction, and radiation. Okay, what heats the air? What causes the air to get hot during the day? I think everyone was right, but yeah, basically the sun's radiation comes in, its radiation comes in and hits the ground, and the ground itself starts getting hot. And the ground gets hot for a layer below the ground. If you measure the daily fluctuations in temperature below the ground, they go cold and hot and cold and hot in a daily cycle. So there's a layer of earth, if you like, that gets heated by the sun. But the radiation doesn't heat the air, so air doesn't get heated by radiation. So how does the air get heated? Well, it's in contact with the ground. So this layer of air just above the ground, in contact with the ground, gets warm. It gets heated. And then convection comes into play. So we've got this convective heating here, and of course convection in the atmosphere transfers that local heating into more general heating in the atmosphere. So what we're interested in as glider pilots, of course, is the areas that get the hottest. So everyone knows black gets hot. White doesn't get hot, anywhere near as hot. So red gets hot. Put your hand on a red car, it's hotter than a white car. Yellow car is almost as cool as a white car, etc., etc. So you can work out which colours are going to get hotter. But it's also a matter of which which ground features are going to transfer by conduction, transfer the heat into the ground. So if the ground is wet, then the water tends to conduct the heat away more easily, and so the surface isn't going to get as hot. So if you've got saturated ground, or rivers, dry river beds that have got a high water table, or whatever it is, salt lakes that have got a high water table, they're not going to get as hot. Salt lakes, of course, are white as well, so they're not going to get as hot. So all those things are worthwhile. Now, the other thing, of course, that helps to transfer the heat from the ground into the air is the surface area. So, a ground that's got a high surface area is going to transfer the heat from the ground into the air more readily. So if you've got stubble, for example, with all the stalks sticking up, the stubble gets warm from the sun and also transfers the heat quite easily into the air. So occasionally you do get a really good thermal over a stubble paddock, even though it might have started somewhere else. So at night time, of course, the reverse happens. So at night time, the ground is, we don't have any radiation coming in, the ground is radiating its heat out. So by radiation at night, the ground gets cold. So it starts being warmer into getting colder. So that bottom layer of air in contact with the ground also cools down, and we get this, when you look up your information on the BOM website, they call that the radiation inversion. So the nighttime inversion is the radiation inversion, because the heat is radiated from the ground and the ground cools the air. So you get that nighttime cold layer causing the radiation inversion. Yeah, okay, well I thought it was worth having a brief touch on that energy or heat transfer mechanism that affects the atmosphere, especially the area that we're interested in. If you've got a hill and the sun's on this side's going to get more radiation, isn't it, than that side? You can see that, just because of the angle. So if the wind is coming that way, it tends to blow that hot layer of air over here and perhaps kick it off. If the air's coming this way, then there tends to be a stagnant layer there, so this can get really hot and eventually cause a really nice, strong thermal bubble. But the angle of incidence is important. That's why the ground doesn't heat up very quickly in the morning or in the evening, but heats up more rapidly during the day, because in general, across the whole area, the angle of incidence is higher.
Greg, is that something you need to know in your pre-flight planning, or is that just by during a flight and perhaps finding yourself low and in the vicinity of a hill, as you've just described, is that when that is coming into the equation for you in deciding where you're going to go?
Well, it can be one of the factors, yeah. Yeah, we'll talk about thermal sources a bit, but clearly an area of ground that's got the right colour, the right surface texture, so it can transfer the heat easily to the air, and if it's on a hill and the incidence is high, the radiation incidence is high, it's going to get hotter.
Okay, so Greg's described how this air is getting hot near the ground, so you get a pool of air, and there's this kind of layer, it's only about 200 or 300 feet thick, called the supraadiabatic layer. It's very unstable, but the hot air tends to not be able to penetrate it. But this air, it's over what we've been talking about, the red paddocks, the dark paddocks. It's just getting hotter and hotter, but it needs a reason to get going, so it needs a trigger point. And there's so many trigger points. I mean, the obvious ones, we were talking before, if the wind's blowing the hot air parcel, there's a bit of a ridge, that might be enough just to get it to break through this layer, and then it just feeds itself up. Other trigger points Could be just as simple as a line of trees. I think we get that at Beverley quite a lot when the easterly wind's blowing and it just hits that north-south one-way line of trees. The amount of willy-willies we see up and down that runway, well, you can hear it going through the trees, definitely kicks it off. The other thing we're talking about too is the salt lake, so contrast. So if you've got warm ground and cold ground, or water over a lake, whatever, and that's being moved by the wind, hits the cold, suddenly it's very, very buoyant, and that'll kick it off too. So that's another trigger point. I've heard it said even a winch launch will trigger a thermal. I haven't done much winching, so I don't know if that's true, but I believe it is. But we need the hot air pool. We need the trigger. Over the big flat paddocks, I mean, there's not always trigger points. When you're flying at Southern Cross, it's dead flat. It seems that every little rock we fly over has got a thermal over it. It's unbelievable. But whereas around Perth, around Beverley, we fly over some of the biggest rocks I've seen and there's nothing. But I think that's because there's been too many trigger points. Around Southern Cross, where it's just flat and featureless, really your trigger point could be just a wheat field. So you've got your red paddock next to it, that's nice and hot. The air flows over the wheat paddock, kicks it off. So the thermal, so we assume it's still feeding from this hot air pool. It's kicked off. It keeps drifting of the wind. It keeps coming into contact with other pools of hot air in the superadiabatic layer that haven't kicked off yet. But the thermal's drifting, probably drifting faster than the pools of air because now it's getting into the upper, the winds are 2,000 or 3,000 feet. So it starts to feed off these, so these will feed in, drifts over, it just keeps building up energy, becoming stronger and stronger. Eventually, it's actually assuming the shape of a proper thermal. The air's just sucking in. Even weaker thermals that might have popped up here are getting sucked into this as well, becoming more established. So now it's becoming a proper thermal. So we've got a proper core. You got your weak lift. Same that side, so it's going up. This is very strong. Hasn't got a top yet. Still got the inflow. So if you're in a glider, this might be around about 1,000 foot there. If you're in a glider and you kind of hit the thermal about this height, very easy to thermal it. You just basically 40-degree bank, it almost sucks you into it. So very easy to thermal down low. Once the thermal's established like this, because it's all sucking in. It's all sucking in down the bottom. Then eventually it's going to hit the inversion, cause a bit of a bowl on top of the inversion. The core will probably keep going at almost the same rate. So if it's a 6 knot thermal, it'll be 6 knots all the way to the top, maybe 2 or 3 knots here. Clearly if you're leaving at 6 and you go maybe down to 5.5, it's not worth centering again, because by the time you centre and climb 500 feet before it starts to fall apart again, you're probably only going to average 100 or 200 feet a minute. If it's going to 6, I would probably be quite happy flying normally, looking for a really good thermal to 4,000 feet. 3,000, I'd probably take a moderate thermal. So if it's a 6 knot day, at 4,000, 3,000 feet, I'll take 4 knots to get back up to maybe 4.5, and then push on again. So don't take it to the top, but just use a little bit of a top up just to keep yourself in this good area where there's not much sink and you're not getting into this bad area where you're having heavy sink and there's really no good climbs. At least in this area, when you hit a thermal, you're normally hitting a good one.
Now I'm talking about thermal streeting.
Thermal streeting, well, we can. Obviously on a cumulus day you can see all the streeting, and it doesn't seem to matter if it's a southerly, a southwesterly, a southeasterly, an easterly. It seems to be if there's cues, I can see streeting. So that means that on blue days there's streeting as well. Streeting almost always lines up with the wind. So getting the forecast winds off the area forecast or RASP as we were talking about, or even when at Beverley at briefing time at 10 o'clock you're outside and you see the cues which you know are going to burn off, you can see the direction they're streeting. They're probably going to street that direction all day. So it's worth taking note of that, but certainly with our GPSs in the glider, so you leave a thermal, so we're going that way, but the wind's coming from the northwest, say. So leaving the thermal, I probably tend to leave it into wind, and I just go for a little bit, just in case it's streeting. If nothing happens, I'll immediately start to head on track. But it's amazing how you can go 2 or 3 or 4 kilometres into wind without losing altitude, sometimes even making it. And then once it all falls apart, back on track. Same thing when you hit so you're flying this direction again, the wind's still there. You hit a bit of a bubble, turn into wind, see if you can pick up a street again. So that's for crosswind. Obviously when you're going into wind, I should emphasise this is what I do, it's not what everyone does. Ingo, I know, just flies dead straight on compass heading. So obviously if wind's that way, so we're flying into wind. If we're not really getting the sort of air we want, I would maybe fly 10 degrees off track, maybe for 2 or 3 minutes, just to see if the air is going to change. Just watch the Netto area very closely. Maybe get it to come back to 0 or maybe even be slightly positive. As soon as I see slightly positive, GPS wind direction, point that way again. And it's amazing how you might get another 5k of good air again. You just keep making slight changes to try and see if you can stay in that good air direction. Is that what you do, Greg? Yeah. Not everyone flies like that. I reckon 90% of people probably do, that I've seen flying successfully. Ingo I've seen just go straight over a lake, doesn't care. He knows he's going to get something at 1,500 feet on the other side, bang, up he goes. And I've gone right around the lake and arrived at the same time as him. We'd probably talk about centering of thermals. So your simple thermal. So you've got a core, strong, 6 knots, and you've got the outside bit, maybe 3, and you've got sink. So we're flying along. We're very lucky we're going to hit this one right in the middle. So we start to fly through the sink. We've got the speed up, 70 knots. We'll feel the sink. We'll get towards the edge where it's starting to climb now, so we're going to feel some bubbles. As soon as we feel the bubbles, time to start slowing down. So from 70 knots, once you feel the bubbles, bring it back to 50 to your thermal speed, 55 maybe. And we're just sitting here waiting. We're feeling the ailerons, feeling if it's pushing us one way or the other. Whichever way it's pushing us, we're going to push back towards it. This time we've been unlucky. We've gone straight through the middle. And this is all on feel. The Vario is not going to be doing us much good at all. We've got to get horizontal gusts, which muck about with the total energy. Does anyone not know what I mean by that? Okay, so you got, I'll just draw a side on. Okay, so here's the thermal. Light is heading this way. Total energy is here. we've got these gusts that coming out, or maybe even in, so they're messing around. The total energy is only good for vertical, up and down. If it gets a gust, a change of speed across it, it gives a false indication. It gives a climb or a descent indication. So you're getting a lot of that as you're hitting the thermal. As you're coming up to the edge of the thermal, there's a lot of that happening. So really you've got to just fly, feel it. So you'll feel a slight surge as you hit the weak part of the thermal. And your vario could be saying anything, it doesn't really matter. Then as you hit the core, you're going to feel a big surge. And that'll stop, obviously, because we'll be in the middle, and then we'll feel it start to drop a bit. It's not actually dropping, it's just the surge it's not going up as fast now. So the human body can only feel acceleration, it can't feel steady climb. So if we're in a lift, once the lift's steady up and down, we don't know really whether we're going up or down. So we felt the surge as we hit the core. As soon as we feel the surge stop and start to let us down, we've got to start turning. So straight away, and we're doing that on feel, we're not doing that on vario indications at all. Start to turn, and we do a whole turn. But during that turn, we're going to feel accelerations again. The vario is probably going to have a 2 to 3 second lag, so the vario as we're coming around here is probably telling us what was happening here. So that's why it's no good. So we'll feel it start to sink a bit. It'll probably become steady again. Then we start to feel another surge as we go back towards the core. So as we start to feel that surge again, we're going to straighten up for a second. And we're doing 50 knots, so we're moving 25 metres a second. By that, it's going to take a second or two to roll level and then roll back into your 40-degree bank. So you're probably going to move the circle 50 metres. The core is maybe only 300 or 400 metres. So 50 metres is a fair chunk of the core. So that's all we want to straighten up for, is just a second. And we'll have a new circle going now. Hopefully we're just in the middle. If we're right in the middle, after about 3 seconds, the vario eventually go to 6 knots, and it'll just sit there, and we can say, right, it's going up to 6 knots. We're not feeling any accelerations up or down anymore, so we're in the core. Now that doesn't always happen, sometimes we miss it again. So we've our circle's this way. So we've got half the circle in the core and half out of it. So we're getting 6 knots here, but the vario's not saying it. We're getting 3 knots there, the vario's not saying, because in fact it's probably saying 6 here and 3 there, it's so slow. But we'll feel ourselves fall out of it, and then we start to feel the surge here as we're coming around again. So once again we're going to straighten up for another second or so. So start to straighten here, straight, and then back into it. So the idea is we're building up a mental picture. Every time we do a turn, we do a whole turn to try and build up a mental picture of which way the thermal is. We're doing the mental picture by the acceleration up and down. Very important when we're turning, constant bank, constant airspeed. So if we've got a 40-degree bank, and if you're letting the speed be 50 knots on one half of the thermal, 60 knots on the other side of the thermal, half the thermal, your centre is going to move 35 metres. That's doing nothing except not having proper speed control. So if you're all over the place with your speed, you don't try and get on top of it. I try and thermal within about a knot. Obviously, maybe 2 or 3 knots is okay. But if you're moving every circle 35 metres in no particular direction, you're not going to stay in the thermal very long. So really, really practice speed control. Good lookout, of course. The speed control is, yes, it's on the pitch of the aircraft, but you've also got to watch the ASI a little bit every now and then. Quick look inside, then back outside looking. Always practice accurate speed control, accurate bank. Some people put a protractor on their panel. So most people don't thermal steep enough. Most people think 30 degrees is 45 degrees, and it's not. So the protractor's very good. I think there's even one in my glider, but not for me, that's for Owen. Is he here today?
No.
Most of the time we're heading this way. That's actually easy, I reckon, because in that case, you're going to get all the same warnings, you're going to get the bubbles, you're going to feel the surge, but one wing's going to drop. And that's why you've got to hold the stick really lightly, really light. And the trouble is when you get low, of course, you're not holding it light, you're holding it very hard, but you've got to relax, hold it very light. Just 2 fingers if you can't do it. So you feel the airplane turn the wrong way, so turn the other way. In this case, you start to turn, and you're more likely to actually be mostly in the core if you don't hit it head on. Now if you turn the wrong way, of course, if you just let the airplane do what it wants to do, you're going to be out this side in the sink. That's really no problem. You still know where the thermal is. You know you've gone the wrong way, it's saying 6 knots down. So a 270-degree turn, you'll be pointing back at the thermal. And try and get a mental picture of which way the thermal is. So sometimes you haven't got time whilst thermaling. It might not be any definite surge. So if there's no surge, there's no point making a correction. But you might then be able to read the vario and think, well, I think the vario's, now it's settled down a bit. Maybe you almost break it into quadrants. So you might have but just have a mental note to yourself. Was it better to the north quadrant? Was it better to the east quadrant? So if you can't really feel any surge telling you to go in a direction, just by watching the vario and allowing for the lag, remembering that it's 2 or 3 seconds behind, you say, well, maybe it's better to the north. So when you come around to the north, you might just straighten for a second and then see how it goes. So sometimes you have to do a turn, even though you know you're not in the core, you're doing a turn to make sure that you're actually getting a proper mental picture. In the early days of going cross country, if you make too many corrections, I think you start to lose track of where the mental core is in your mind. Questions? Additives, Greg.
What about when you got cues there? What are the factors that determine where the actual core is going to be under a cue?
Oh, we'll talk about that.
Oh.
Yeah, this is just centric.
Okay.
I think what you say is important. You need to try and build up a mental picture of what's happening in the thermal and where you are in relation to it. And you need to have some sort of grid system on the ground, whether it's fence lines or north, south, east, west or whatever, to help you build up that mental picture. And that is very useful.
The sun's very good.
Yeah, and the sun, yeah, great. So then you can see this side is good, this side is not so good, I need to move to that side.
Yeah.
And as G. Dale says, centering technique, at the end of the day, you want to stay in the good part and move away from the bad part.
Don't keep circling in the bad area.
Yeah.
Never fly through the same dagger twice. Yeah.
I guess you're saying like small changes rather than great big.
I only talk about 1 second. I think unless it's obvious you've made a big mistake, you might want to do 2 or 3 seconds. Generally, just 1 second is plenty. Yeah. Especially if you're doing every turn, you're making a correction. You should make a correction every turn. You should never be happy with what you get unless you just happen to sit there and you can tell when you're in the core it goes almost dead smooth actually. Whereas when you're not in the core it's lumpy. Smooth and lumpy. Right, so leaving the thermal. Well, the best, so you're going this direction. So the best way to leave a thermal, so you're in the core, you're going around, you make the decision heading the other way, heading south, you're going to go north, you tighten up right through the core, right through the middle, accelerating, so you're coming out into the sink, already doing your 70, 80 knots. If you just do a gentle departure like this, and then leave the thermal here, well, you're in the sink. The sink's all around the outside, and then out here it's steady air. So you're in the sink area for so long, and not only that, you haven't really accelerated. So this way you might be in the sink area a couple of seconds, and you've got a very small sink area, just this bit here. This way, this is your sink area that the guy that does that, if you've done that, will probably be 200 or 300 foot below you straight away, as soon as you're even with it. So 200 or 300 foot of every thermal just on the way you depart it.
Sorry, you outpaced my brain there.
Yep.
You can do that again quickly.
Okay.
Apologies.
So the core, the important bit is the sink on the outside. Okay, so you're happy with that, the way that looks? So you've got the core, you're thermaling in the core. So your radius is like that. So if you just do a standard sort of departure, you know, level off on track, you're kind of coming out the side of the thermal and then kind of paralleling or tangenting the circle. So you're sitting in this sink area for much longer than the guy that really tightens up, 60 degrees bank here, and he goes right through the middle of the core, and he's only got that little area there of sink area to get out of. So you're talking about cues, was it? Yep. Right. So you'd expect a cue to have a nice flat base, but it doesn't. What it normally has, well, if it does have a flat base, they do sometimes, and you're going to get a dark area, which is under the thickest part of the cue. The thickest part of the cue is where the strongest climb is. So with no other clues, you would go to the darkest area. But that seems to happen on your very small cues that are only a few hundred metres across. The bigger cues tend to have bowls underneath. So if you're flying along and you see an indentation into the cloud, that's where I'd be going first. You've all seen them? Everyone's seen them? The other thing you get wispy, it's not rain, it's little cloud things hanging down, little wispy.
Okay.
It's not virga, it's not rain, it's actually cloud, little tendrils. Tails. Anyway, that's extra moist air. Now moist air is more buoyant than dry air. So that's another area that's probably got a good climb. You see the bowl a lot, that you don't see as much. And the other thing you get near clouds, and you're not that often as you like, but you get the little sparrows everywhere. I don't know if anyone's seen those. Whenever you see the sparrows, go for them. They're the best thermal of the day. Better than eagles, better than other gliders. Unfortunately, we only see them 3 or 4 times a year.
Is that because they're eating insects that are
I think so. I think they've sucked out the bear. I think so. I don't really know. I've never asked one. What are they called here? What are they called here then? They look like sparrows, or swallows or something. Swallows. They'll be swallows. Swallows. Yeah. They're naughty little birds. Yeah. Now, another thing we get with cue. Has anyone ever noticed normally the sunny side works best? Why does anyone know why? Well, she probably does. Anyway, so the sun's rays casts a shadow on the ground. This is what I think it is anyway. I might be wrong. So you would expect the best part of the thermal to be in the middle. So the thermal's feeding up from here. So this is still hot air, the hot pool of air, still feeding into the thermal. This used to be a hot pool of air, but now it's got a shadow, so it's going to cool down really quick. So this is what I think happens. The whole good part of the thermal moves towards the sun. And you'd almost say every day, 9 out of 10 days, the best part of the thermal is the sunny side. Now there are a few complications, or actually not really complications. So if you've got a northerly, say with an east-west wind, that's really not going to change much at noon. Obviously as the sun goes around to the west, there might be some changes. But anyway, let's do an easy one, the northerly wind blowing. I assume that's a northerly wind, the sun's in the north. So that's going to move the whole thermal over.
The wind is going to move.
The wind is moving, yeah, so the wind is moving the cloud and the thermal over. So it means that the thermal is going to end up more over this shaded area. So the bit that's in shade now, not in shade yet, the cloud, the whole thermal structure will eventually be over that bit that's in the shade. So you no longer got that hot source there anymore. So what that does, it moves it more into wind as well. So if you've got the sunny side and a north, and when I say northerly wind, it could be northeasterly, northwesterly, so any of the trough days really here in WA, it moves the thermal more towards the sunny side. It's amazing how sometimes it almost feels it's right on the edge. Anyone had different observations to that?
Well, even further out from the edge.
I've had climbs like out in the blue that seem to be just in front of the cloud. I think that's with a very strong wind and maybe the sun quite starting to get low towards the northwest.
I guess the wind does tend to increase its speed as you get higher, and so that tends to cause the thermal to lean over a little bit.
Yeah, so look, thermals, if the wind was steady, the thermal would be dead upright. It just drifts to the wind and it just sucks the stuff, the hot air from the hot ground. What Greg is saying, if you've got a wind shear, the thermal will, so the wind's getting stronger with altitude. It will lean a bit. So if you're down low in this situation with the cloud above you there, it almost seems like you're actually in front of the cloud.
Yeah, so the thermal's on the upwind side.
And you find that actually what will happen is the cube will start to form, it'll move into wind, won't move into wind, but it'll kind of move into wind. So by the time you get up here, the cloud's over you again. So the cloud reforms on itself. So here you ask the question, what happens to the southerly wind? Any guesses?
Not good.
It's not brilliant, but it's still there. It's never a good day when there's a southerly anyway, is it, Greg? So what it does, it moves the core more to the middle. So if there's a southerly, southeasterly, southwesterly, and you've got the sun, go towards the middle of the cube. And all other times, sunny side, windy side.
But sometimes you can get cloud streaks when the wind is coming from the sun, so the streaks are lining up with the sun.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you get so let's say the sun's this way. So you get a shadow here. So no thermals form there. and then this bit's in the sunshine, so you get a cloud streak again, and that causes a shadow here. So that doesn't work, and then you get another cloud line here. So you get, it doesn't actually have to line up with the wind.
Yeah, but when you do get the wind lining up with the direction of the sun, then it can become quite higgledy-piggledy. It just tends to destroy the street almost, and it's very hard to predict what's happening and where to go. And
It's easy with Q though, isn't it?
it's always easier with Q, yeah.
It becomes very difficult in the blue.
But it's just something to look out for.
Yeah.
So you need to try and work out where the best heated areas are that you can go to, and combine that with the clouds. And sometimes you might find that the shadows are destroying a particular street, but then there's an area which hasn't had the shadow on it for some reason that's going really well. So it's a good to keep that in mind when you're working out where to go, 10 or 20 kilometres away.
What trigger sources are you looking for? Really, I mean, what the idea is really, when you're high, it doesn't matter so much. They could be anywhere. But as you're gliding along and you think, I'm starting to get low, and when I say low, I mean, you might be getting 6,000 foot a day, you're starting to get to 3,500 feet, you start thinking, well, maybe I'll make sure that if I do get really low, I'm over an area of good thermal sources. So that might be a bunch of red paddocks out to the left, or if it's a windy day, you might... Hilly areas are good on a windy day because we were talking about the sun obviously hitting them at an angle. Also, you get the pools, pools of hot air there. Because there's no use having a parcel there that's just drifting across the paddock so fast. It's not staying in contact with the hot ground long enough. So if you get pools where it's slowed down, the hilly ground is excellent. So you've got the sunshine making that hotter because of the angle, and then you've also got it right next to it, it's forming a pool, letting it heat up, and then you've got a trigger source. So if it's a crappy windy day, it's almost better to be over the bit north of Beverley towards Cundon than it is to be out to the east of Queredy where it's just dead flat. That's what I found. And so I'll try and on a windy day find. You're not looking for hills, you're just looking for lumpy ground, so you're getting pools of hot air able to be there long enough to form a thermal. And once the thermal forms as well, remember it just drifts across the top of these little hills and it picks up these little pools of, finds another one there, it picks up another pool of hot air and they just keep going. Once they've kicked off and they've become self-feeding, they're no longer coming off the same big red hot paddock that initially started over. Now it's feeding over all this other stuff, so you can run into that anywhere really. Really when I'm getting down to, if I'm down to 2,000 feet, say on a 6,000 foot day, I'm trying to make sure I'm over the red paddocks, so, and I'm sort of paddock hopping then, trying to find the hottest sources with the best triggers. But certainly at 3,000 out of 6,000, not really sure. I'll try and get in an area, but actually, we were talking earlier on about the salt lakes, so I do like to cruise down the edge of salt lakes, and I think the hot air does flow down onto the salt lake and it kicks off. It could even kick off a streak when there's no streeting, or even just give you buoyant air.
Maybe just to wrap up on thermal sources, why don't you call out where your favourite thermal sources are? We'll just write them up on the board.
We especially want to know where Cundons are.
That's right. Who's got their favourite thermal sources? Salt lakes? That's good, Rob. You go for the salt lakes.
Salt Lake.
Salt lakes?
Croydon Rock.
Rocks, big rocks.
Who said Queredy Rock?
Yeah, mate. Sometimes you get
I reckon the Queredy Forest, but I don't have a lot of luck with the rock there.
Yeah, I reckon the forest is the go.
Yeah,
Forests.
Forest late in the day.
Yes, we didn't mention the late in the day thermals.
Forests, you reckon later?
Dry river beds,
Dry river beds?
the white sand down in the river, and Link's saying what Norm was saying, it's just cooling down there.
Probably the gully more than anything, yeah. River beds? You mean dry river beds?
Dry,
Yeah.
Just as you're turning base,
I don't know where you turn base, but
What about roads?
Turn base higher.
yeah, roads potentially, yep. Roads and build-up areas, I guess. Roads and towns.
That's burning off season, that's usually good.
Sorry, what?
Burning off season.
Absolutely, yeah. Fires.
Fires are not easy though. You have to get them just right.
Yes.
Yeah.
They make you choke and you smoke.
And there's a power station near Warwick, which is really good.
Quarries, the old Narrabeen.
Quarries,
Narrabeen quarry is always good.
big hole in the ground, yeah, builds up the heat.
Rubbish tips?
Yeah. Even at Beverley, the rubbish tip works fairly often.
Red stable, any contrast?
Red
Oh,
paddocks.
There's always hot air come off of that.
Yeah, red is good. And burnt areas, I guess. Red and black.
You over that area?
Combine harvesters.
Yeah, harvesters, yeah.
Under an eagle.
Harvesters. Sorry, someone said something that I missed.
Yeah, under an eagle.
Eagles play games, you know. Anyway, that's the idea, isn't it? Gives you the idea. And hilly areas, as Norm said. Hilly areas. In fact, everyone's heard of Alderside. It is a bit of a sinkhole. It's flat. I think it's got a high water table, not many features. So if you're getting low around there, you can head for the hills. That's the best thing to do.
It's interesting, Hampton Plains is supposed to be quite wet, isn't it? And yet I always seem to find, I'm always worried going in there, but I always seem to find a good climb. And it's probably, maybe it's the dry air or the hot air just hitting the wets.
Yeah, that area around Alderside is not that good. It's not that big. It's just low and probably cool, high water table. And there's lots of green areas in there now too. The forests also tend to be a bit. They're probably forests because they couldn't be very easily cleared in a lot of cases, and so they're a bit rugged and. Yeah, forest areas, especially later, are good. All right. Any other ideas on sources? I think those are all good.